I'm gonna have some really hot takes on this list, so please don't hate me if you disagree with something. Today, I'm ranking every single killer in Dead by Daylight based on their overall quality. We're gonna be taking into account their fun factor, visual appearance, ability creativity, add-ons, and sound design. I'm gonna rate each of these categories out of 10, and then add them all up to determine where they are placed on the tier list. So let's start with artist, for example. Playing as the artist is pretty fun because you can go for these like really cool long shots, so it's very satisfying to get hits with your crows. Her power is also nice because you can find immersed survivors pretty easily, and you can just generally know where a lot of the survivors are at all times in the match. Playing against her, though, it's a different story. Sometimes it feels like there's absolutely nothing you can do in chase, which makes her extremely unfun to play against. Part of the problem with her is that her best counterplay is to hold W and leave a loop. Otherwise, you're going to get hit by her crow or just hit by her. So for fun factor, I'm going to give her a 6 out of 10. I think she has a fantastic visual design with the ink on her face to make it look like she's crying, even down to the details of like her head moving makes her look like it's a crow, right? And I'm gonna give her a 10 out of 10 for that front. For ability creativity, I would say it's decent. It shares a lot of similarities to other things that we have in the game, and I feel like there was a lot of missed potential with like using the actual crows that are spawning in the match. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10. For her add-ons, I would say they're pretty mid-tier. I'm gonna be a little bit harsher on this add-on category for all of the killers because some of them are terrible and some of them are really good and unique, but then there's some like the artist, which just benefit you in very small ways and don't really change anything with the killer. So I'm gonna give this one a 6 out of 10 purely because the add-ons are just little buffs and they aren't very creative. And then with sound design, this is absolutely going to be a 10 out of 10. Artist has some of the best sound design in the entire game, in my opinion. Like when she came out on the PTB, I was genuinely scared of this killer when I didn't know what her power was because her sound design was just so strong. It captures everything about the artist's personality so well, and I just love it. So this gives her a total of 39 points, which lands her in the top of B tier. Moving on to Blight. Fun factor, I'm gonna give a 9 out of 10. I think he's one of the most fun killers in the game from both sides. Playing against him feels relatively fair apart from the add-ons, and playing as him feels super fun and super rewarding because you're just bouncing around the map, you're going super fast, you don't have to worry about just holding W to catch up to survivors. He's very fast-paced, which I love. The only reason why it's not a 10 out of 10 is because sometimes the hitboxes are so unbelievably frustrating that you'll just slide off of objects or you'll just bump into something that's not even there, and it can get very annoying. But yeah, I'm gonna give Blight a 9 out of 10. I think he has a great visual appearance. It really captures the essence of like a scientist gone mad to his experiments, and I think all of the gross features of his body really help to emphasize that the experiment went wrong. So I'm also gonna give this a 9 out of 10. For ability creativity, I would actually argue that it's pretty creative. Coming up with the idea to have to bounce off of walls to extend your power is so random. Like, I don't know who came up with that idea, but it was kind of smart, to be honest. Blight was a very creative killer and was well designed in the sense that everything you do can cause a detriment to you if you don't do it successfully. I'm gonna give his ability creativity a 9 as well. Unfortunately, his add-ons are his downside. A lot of them are borderline overpowered, like Alk Ring and Compound 33, but many of his higher tier add-ons change his playstyle completely, which I do really appreciate. I would say the add-ons are well designed too and can just be rebalanced instead of reworked. I just don't know why they haven't done it yet. But honestly, I think his add-ons are good and really help to kind of emphasize different playstyles. So I'm going to give his add-ons an 8 out of 10. And for his sound design, I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. The sound design is so good. Everything from his fatigue to his rushing, and his total ends up being 45 points, which puts him in the S tier. Moving on to Bubba. Fun factor is a little bit hard because it completely depends on the Bubba player. If you play in the campy, boring playstyle, obviously that's not very fun because you're not doing anything. But if you're playing as a normal Bubba, he's pretty fun, but he's kind of map dependent. Like for example, if you're playing on Gideon Meat Plant, he is one of the most boring characters because you're just chasing a survivor and breaking pallet after pallet after pallet and nothing's happening. But if you're on more of a regular map that doesn't have an abundance of pallets, he's pretty fun because there's a lot of cool mind games that you can do with his chainsaw ability, and you can just kind of get in the survivors' heads because you have an insta-down ability. Playing against him is also fun in my opinion. Again, if they're not playing in the campy, boring playstyle, I think playing against him is very fun because there's that tension of if you'll go down or if you'll survive that chase. But unfortunately, I can't in good faith give him anything higher than a 7 out of 10 because so many Bubbas play him in the campy and boring playstyle. Visual appearance is kind of hard to rate for licensed characters because obviously they're just taken from their various sources of media, but I think Bubba fits so well into DBD, I'm gonna give this a 10 out of 10. For the Cannibal's ability creativity, I'm gonna have to say it's kind of on the worst side aside, his ability was just a worse version of Hillbilly at the time of release. It definitely got a little bit better with his rework, but I still think it's one of the probably least creative designs we have on this list. Although, to be honest, I don't know how much you could necessarily do with a chainsaw. But still, I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. For his add-ons, I'm straight up going to give this a 4 out of 10. There's like 3 or 4 add-ons that are actually viable, and the rest of them are just essentially useless. And then for sound design, I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. Obviously, there's not much they can do because he's a simple character, but it's still good sound design. They do really capture that kind of crazy nature of his character. And of course, his chainsaw has that iconic sound that you can recognize from anywhere on the map. This gives him a total of 35 points, which places him in the bottom of the B tier. Moving on to Pinhead, fun factor is kind of dependent on the person. Like personally, I really enjoy playing as Pinhead because I think it's satisfying to get those hits with your chains. I just think overall he's a little too simple for my liking. So playing as him is pretty fun, but not like super fun. And then playing against him, it really depends on the team. Playing against his main ability with the chains is actually really fun in my opinion. It's fun to kind of predict where they're going to put their chains, but playing against the Lament configuration as a solo queue team is pretty atrocious and totally brings down the fun factor. However, if you're with a coordinated team who can actually say like who's going to get the box and stuff, it's not that bad. So overall, I'm going to give his character a 7 out of 10. For visual appearance, I think they did a fantastic job with absolutely everything. I'm going to give this one a 9 because A, he looks great. His animations are awesome whenever you hit a survivor or when you're solving the box. All of that looks fantastic. I do think there's a couple animations that make him feel kind of awkward, but that could just be his character in general. I've just never seen the movies, so I don't really know. Ability creativity, I'm going to have to give this one a 9 out of 10. I think they did a very good job integrating the things that were from the films. I do wish there was a little bit more creativity in solving the box, like making it so that you had to actually solve some sort of puzzle, so to speak. But I do think the simplicity is good because he seems complicated on paper. His add-ons are pretty mid. They kind of just do additional like tiny effects, but it's nothing bad. They're pretty balanced. Everything has some sort of use, kind of. So I'll give these a 7 out of 10. I think they did a phenomenal job with all of the sound design. Every single bit of his power feels very like sharp. It's just satisfying. I don't know how to describe it, but I'm going to give this one a 10 out of 10. This puts him at 42 points, which places him in the A tier. Moving on to the Clown, I actually think Clown is pretty fun to play as because it's kind of satisfying to hit your bottles. And the little knife spin that he does every time you hit a survivor is so fun. However, playing against him is literally the most atrocious thing ever. Playing against a clown as survivor is so unbelievably boring that I'm gonna have to bring his fun factor down to a 4. It's so awful. You can't see. It makes you dizzy. You can't loop. You have to pre-drop all your pallets, so you use up all your resources. It's just so boring. For visual appearance, I think they actually did a really good job integrating a clown into this game. I do think he could have been a little bit scarier, but I think they wanted to make his character more almost comedic and kind of insane than like actually scary. So I guess they did a good job in that front. I think there's a lot of missed potential. I'm gonna give this one an 8 out of 10. I still think they did a good job capturing what they wanted. Ability creativity. This is probably one of the least creative abilities in the game. The reason he exists is because back in the day, survivors, when they started to learn that looping was a thing, were kind of dominating the meta just because they knew how to loop instead of it being a hide and seek game. So they came out with a killer to prevent looping. That's literally the entire reason this killer exists. So I'm going to give his ability creativity a 2 out of 10. I would say his add-ons are kind of in a rough spot as well. It's not like they're bad or anything. They're just kind of boring. Like they just add 1 second here or decrease this by 10% or whatever. The only things that kind of change how he plays are his pinky finger and middle finger iridescent add-ons. But these, especially pinky finger, are very strong and kind of ruin his balance entirely. So I'm going to give his add-ons a 6 out of 10. And lastly, for sound design, I would say his sound design is pretty good. I think the elephant in the room is his laugh. His laugh is phenomenal and definitely adds points, but everything else is just kind of meh. There's not really much you can do, but I don't feel like there's a lot of sound design in general with this character, so I'm just going to give it an 8 out of 10 purely for the laugh. This totals to 28 points, which puts him in the D tier. Moving on to the Death Slinger. Fun factor, in my opinion, I think he's extremely fun to play. You can go for some crazy shots, and it's super satisfying to hit your shots as well. So I would say he's very fun to play. Playing against, he's a little less fun, but he's much more fun than he used to be with his insta quickscope thing. So I don't personally mind him that much, besides the fact that his best counterplay is to hold W because he's a very slow character. So I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10 on the fun factor. Visual appearance, I think they did a pretty phenomenal job getting that kind of Western character into the game. He fits very well into the aesthetic of DBD. I just think they could have made him a little bit scarier personally, so I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10 on the visuals. For ability creativity, I would say it's like kind of middle of the road. I think it was a little too similar to the Huntress, but I do think they did a pretty good job at kind of separating him from her. So I'm probably going to give this a 6 out of 10. His add-ons are again kind of mid. Most of them are just tiny effects that don't really do anything. Although I do think his iridescent coin add-on is a cool way to change how he plays because it makes you go for long shots more to be able to insta down when you spear someone. I think we need more add-ons that completely change his playstyle, and this is really the only one that does that. I'm going to give his add-ons a 4 out of 10. For sound design, I think his sound design is great. Every time you shoot, every time you spear somebody, all of it's very, very good and works really well. This gives him a total of 36 points, which puts him right above the Cannibal. Moving on to the Demogorgon, I think he's one of the most fun killers to play in the game, but still gives you a high skill ceiling, and he feels so fast-paced when you're in base. I love playing as the Demogorgon, and also playing against the Demogorgon is fun. Yeah, I just love this character. I'm gonna give him a solid 10 out of 10. For his visual appearance, I think they did a great job taking him exactly from Stranger Things and putting him into DBD. I'm pretty sure they used the same like 3D models as well, just to make him look even better. Everything about him looks great, from the claws to the dashes to the teleporting and when he's crawling in his little hole. I'm gonna give his visual design a 9 out of 10. For ability creativity, I would say that his lunge isn't very creative, but his teleporting is pretty creative. I guess the teleporting itself isn't, but like the portals are. Being able to place them down and have them be invisible until you interact with them, and just the fact that they can show where survivors are with the killer instinct, and that survivors can cleanse them, it's just overall a very well-balanced ability. So I'm gonna give ability creativity an 8 because his lunge is, you know, it's just a lunge, but his teleporters are very cool. For add-ons, I'm gonna give this an 8 out of 10. A lot of his add-ons are like the normal, just plus this, but some of them completely change how you play as this character. Like there's some that increase his stealth when coming out of a portal. There's some like the lifeguard whistle that triggers a killer instinct without having to charge your ability, so you can do a really defensive like totem playstyle or whatever. There's also Lepro's Lichen, which shows you the auras of all survivors whenever you teleport, which is so unbelievably fun to use. So that's why I'm giving the total add-on score an 8 out of 10. And lastly, for sound design, everything is fantastic. I'm giving this a 10 out of 10. Everything from the cleansing sounds to the sounds when another survivor is cleansing across the map, to the teleporting, to shredding, and the hit sound, the successful hit sound. It's all so good and totally sounds like the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. This totals him to 45 points, which puts him in the S tier, tied with Blight. Moving on to Doctor, I don't think Doctor's very fun in my opinion. I don't really enjoy anything about him besides the fact that you can find survivors that are playing immersed, and playing against him isn't totally fun either, besides the fact that he has to actually chase you. So overall fun factor, I'm gonna give him a 6 out of 10. For visual appearance, I think they did a great job making him like just seem insane. The wide open smile that's like forced open by his little metal contraption on his head is so awesome. The electricity that comes out of his weapon. So I'm gonna give his overall design a 9 out of 10. Ability creativity, I'm gonna give this one a 10 out of 10. I think it's one of the most creative abilities we have in the game. The whole concept of madness and seeing hallucinations of pallets or anything like that is super awesome, while also having built-in slowdown and built-in anti-loop without any of it being too overbearing. I think it's a perfect balance of pretty much everything that you need besides mobility, which not every killer needs to have mobility, so it's fine. I'm gonna give a good score to his add-ons as well, because his add-ons add different illusionary effects, which is of course one of the coolest things about his power. So I'm gonna give his add-ons a 9 out of 10. And lastly, sound design, of course, phenomenal. Everything from his laugh to like the staticky sounds to the shock sounds, everything is so good. And this totals his score to 44 points, which puts him in the top of the A tier. For Dredge, I actually don't find him to be very fun. I think he just feels a little too clunky for me for some reason. I don't really know how to describe it. Like, he has mobility, but it's not great, and he has anti-loop, but it's also not great. And then he has his Nightfall, which, you know, you can't really see how it affects you personally. And then from a survivor's perspective, he's kind of fun. He's relatively fun in chase. Getting jump scared by his lockers is pretty fun as well. But Nightfall is kind of not very exciting because it kind of feels like you can't really do anything to counter him coming up to you during Nightfall. So I'm gonna give his overall fun factor a 7 out of 10. For visual appearance, I think they did a phenomenal design with this. I'm gonna give this a 10 out of 10. Very ambitious with his visual design and created a killer that we've never really seen before. We haven't had too many monster killers that aren't very humanoid, so this was a nice step in a different direction. And being able to change his appearance to like dolls or anything else like that is very cool. I would say it's pretty creative, but also people have been asking for something to teleport you through lockers for, you know, 6 years, so I don't necessarily know if it was an original idea. I do think Nightfall is pretty creative though, but overall I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10. For add-ons, add-ons, his purples and iridescent add-ons do change his playstyle quite a bit, but they're nothing too drastic, and I'd like to see more like interesting things. Compared to some of the other killers, he does have a lot more fun things that you can use, like the one where if you teleport, a bunch of lockers in that area open and close just to kind of mess with the survivors. So stuff like that's kind of fun, but I think they need a little bit more unique things. But overall, I think the add-ons are pretty well designed, so I'm going to give them an 8 out of 10. And lastly, for sound design, of course, this is going to be 10 out of 10. He has some of the best sound design in the game. They've really been hitting it out of the park in their sound design lately. Like for this killer specifically, all of the cries of the people that you can hear during nightfall and everything's so well done. And this totals him to 42 points, which puts him in the A tier besides Pinhead. All right, Executioner. I think Executioner is kind of fun to play, kind of not. He feels very clunky, but he also feels very rewarding to get your hits. Playing against him is also pretty fun as long as the killer is actually like trying to go for their ability. If they're not using their ability ever, it's just like any other killer. So I would say fun factor wise, if the ability is being used, I would put it at an 8. For visual appearance, this is going to be a 10 out of 10. I think they took him from Silent Hill and it just fits so well into Dead by Daylight. Everything about him is intimidating and his power just looks cool and the trails look cool and everything looks great. Ability creativity, I'm actually going to give this a 9 out of 10. His range attack is pretty cool. It's not as creative, but it does fit his character very well. However, the cages and the Trails of Torment are all very interesting ideas that makes his playstyle different compared to other killers. Add-ons, it's not great. I'm going to give the add-ons a 2 out of 10. All of his add-ons are basically worthless except for the range add-ons. So they definitely need to work on that. And sound design, of course, is a 10 out of 10. Like, there's no arguing that. He's up there with Dredge at some of the best sound design in the game. Hearing his giant sword knife thing just dragging across the floor and his range attack and his cage, everything sounds so good. So this lands him at a 39, which ties him with the artist in B tier. Ghostface. I think Ghostface is pretty fun to play. He's a little slow paced at times, and sometimes the revealing mechanic is a little bit wonky, but I would say overall he's fun to play. He just doesn't have enough almost. I don't know how to describe it, but sometimes it feels like you can't do anything against the survivors if it's a really good team. Playing against him though is very fun because he's like the main stealth killer of this game that can just sneak up to you and grab you. So you always have to be aware of your surroundings, and getting jump scared is just very fun. So overall, I'm going to give him probably a 7 out of 10. Visual appearance, of course, is awesome. I actually think he's cooler than in the movies because he has these like little like fabric cloth lines that come out of his costume that float in the wind. I think he looks sick. He kind of looks like an assassin in a way. So I'm going to give his overall appearance a 10. For ability creativity, I would say, you know, it's decent. Like, it's kind of simple, but it does utilize his stalking nature just as a killer in general. I think it's relatively creative. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. For add-ons, they used to be pretty rough, but they changed them recently with his rework, and now there's a bunch of add-ons that do completely different things. Like, some of them will give you a speed boost after marking a survivor. One of them will make a generator explode and lose 20% of its progression when marking a survivor. Like, there's some pretty crazy stuff in here that changes up his playstyle a lot. I'm gonna give his add-ons a 9 out of 10. And lastly, for sound design, like, there's not a lot that you can do with him, so I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10, but it's still good. I think the best part about his sound design is kind of the wind sounds of his cloth moving in the air. But other than that, like, I mean, there's not much they could really work with because he's a very simple character. This totals him to 42 points, which ties him with the Cenobite. All right, for Hag, this is going to be very controversial, but I think she's fun to play as and to play against. I think she has such a unique ability that allows you to do a bunch of mind games and allows you to teleport around the map very quickly. Personally, she's one of my favorite killers to play as. Again, as long as you're not doing the whole camping strategy. Overall, I think her fun factor is a 9 out of 10 for me. I know this is a highly disagreed upon topic, but I think she's so fast-paced while playing as her that it's very fun. I think just because I know how to play against her because she's one of my mains makes her more fun to play against because there's counterplay. The reason it's not a 10 out of 10 though is purely because a lot of hags will just trap the hook and just camp near it. For visual appearance, I don't think she's actually that scary, but I like the look of her. It fits her theme very well. I'm gonna give this an 8 out of 10. I also like the animation of hitting a survivor and drinking the blood. I think that is a very cool touch. Ability creativity, I'm gonna give this one a 10 out of 10. I think her ability is so creative, being able to place traps that jump scare survivors and then being able to take control of that jump scare is so cool and so unique. I would say her add-ons are kind of not great. There's only a few different types of add-ons, like range add-ons or like the aura ones or the setting speed ones that are actually useful. So I'm going to give her add-ons a 6 out of 10. Her eerie ones are not that great. A lot of people say that mint rag is good, but that's just not my playstyle, so I don't enjoy using it. Most of her purples are pretty useless except except for Rusty Shackles, which is very, very strong. Sound design, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. I think she has very good sound design with her teleporting and just kind of her breathing too. It gives her a very creepy and swampy vibe, I guess, which is obviously what they're going for. This brings her to a total of 42 points, which ties her with Ghostface. For Hillbilly, fun factor is very dependent on how good you are at this killer. I think he's one of the least fun killers in the game now. I used to main him, so I used to think he was very fun, but they changed his ability, nerfed him, got rid of all of his fun add-ons, added a ton of debris to all of the maps, and with the addition of all these new indoor maps, just makes him so unfun to play as. Playing against him, however, I think he's one of the most fun killers in the entire game. So I think I'm gonna have to give this a 7 because he's super, super fun to play against, especially when the Hillbilly is really, really good. But playing as him just feels so unbelievably awful. For visual appearance, I think it's decent. I don't really know how much more they could do with him. I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10 though. I don't think he's very scary, but I do think he fits the Hillbilly aesthetic very well. Ability, creativity, I mean, this was one of the first killers in the game. I do think it was really creative for the time. Being able to have a fast mobility killer that can also insta-down is awesome. So I'm gonna give this a 9 out of 10. Add-ons, oh my god, his add-ons are awful. His add-ons do change your quote-unquote play style, but they don't do anything. Like, they don't help. They're not helpful at all. So like, nobody uses them. I'm gonna give his add-ons a solid 4 out of 10. And lastly, for sound design, I would say his sound design is decent. I'm gonna give his sound design a 6 out of 10. His chainsaw sound in general sounds good, and it's pretty scary if you're scared of chainsaws, but like the weird gargle sound that he makes now is just so weird. Overall, this places him at the top of C tier with 34 points. For the Huntress, I think Huntress is one of the most fun killers to play as and to play against. Plus, she's one of the most balanced killers too, because there's counterplay on both sides. But I'm not gonna give her a 10, I'm gonna give her a 9, purely because of the hitboxes sometimes. Obviously, this isn't a Huntress specific issue, but obviously this is amplified on Huntress because she has such a fast moving ability. I think her visual appearance is actually not great. I like the mask. I think she fits very well into the aesthetic of Dead by Daylight. I think they could have done a little bit more with her. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. I do think they could have made an actual Huntress like a little bit cooler. Ability, creativity, I think it was really creative. She's one of the first killers in the game though, but there wasn't anything with a ranged attack. She was the first killer in the game to have a ranged attack. So I think on that front, it was very creative for the time, and it was creative while also remaining balanced and easy to use. So I'm gonna give this creativity a 9 out of 10. For her add-ons, I'm also gonna give a 9 out of 10 because a lot of her add-ons completely change her playstyle, like the one that makes her stealthy whenever she reloads. There's add-ons that either allow you to reload faster or have more hatchets or reduce wind-up time even to make you kind of a machine gun huntress. So there's different playstyles that you can do with these add-ons, which is why it's ranked so high. And lastly, for sound design, of course, this is going to be high because of her lullaby. Her lullaby is so iconic. So I'm gonna give this also a 9 out of 10. I don't think it's like anything revolutionary, but the lullaby just makes it so cool. This puts her at a total of 43 points, right above Pinhead. All right, for the Knight, I'm gonna say this is one of my least favorite killers to play in the game, and also one of my least favorite killers to play against. So I'm gonna give this a 1. Visual appearance, I actually think the visual appearance is pretty good. He's quite beefy and very intimidating, but I don't think he's actually that scary. You know what I mean? I think they could have done a little bit more. And honestly, the guards almost are cooler than him, which is fair because the guards are supposed to have their own unique personalities. I just don't think he's like too great. I'm gonna give his visual appearance an 8 out of 10. I do really like the little blue icons that are on his wrist. I think that adds a lot to his character though. Ability, creativity, I am going to give this a 5 out of 10. It's basically just Nemesis zombies, but each Nemesis zombies you can control where they spawn and they have their own little tiny benefits. I think having 4 different characters in one is a cool concept, but they just executed it so poorly. Like, the characters really aren't that different from each other. Add-ons, I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10. The add-ons aren't terrible. They allow you to take 2 of the same character, which can be good for certain builds and certain playstyles, such as breaking all pallets when you spawn the Carnifex, or blocking windows if you draw a patrol path through them. There are a few different playstyles with him, but honestly, they're not great. And then for sound design, I think his sound design isn't actually that great. There's a lot of cool aspects about his sound design, but most of it doesn't really feel like it fits the aesthetic of this game. So I'm going to give his sound design a 7 out of 10 as well. This brings the Knight to a total of 28 points, which puts him right next to the Clown. Okay, for Legion, I actually don't think they're totally that fun. I do like playing them more after their rework, but like, I don't know, for some reason it just doesn't vibe with my playstyle. And also playing against Legion is boring as well, because you're kind of just mending the entire game. I do like being in chase with Legion, and I do do like that his power doesn't have any anti-loop, so there is still that chase aspect, which does bring it up a little bit, but overall, I don't think this character is that fun, so I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Visual appearance, I'm a little conflicted on this because they're supposed to be these people that are just kind of insane and go around with a knife, but I'm still going to give the visual appearance a 4 out of 10 because I think there's so much more that they could do with it besides just like a hoodie and jeans. But I know that's like kind of a controversial take because that's the entire point of the characters, that they're just normal humans, but I am giving points for the masks because I think the masks are cool. Like, they're just people with knives. Ability, creativity, I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. I think it's pretty creative having a killer that kind of chains hits together, but I do think it's a little too basic for it to be scored any higher. Actually, I'm going to raise this to 7 out of 10 because adding that new ability to insta down a survivor that's on their 5th frenzy hit was a very creative change that's very helpful. For their add-ons, I'm actually going to give this an 8 out of 10. I think most of their add-ons do change them quite a bit and kind of changes their playstyle, but a lot of them are just not very good and not worth bringing sometimes. However, just the fact that you can have different playstyles with them is obviously always a good thing. I know I'm becoming a little bit of a broken record here. And lastly, sound design. I think their sound design is pretty decent. I mean, there's not much you can do with them because again, they're just like a person, so it's just their breathing. However, something that'll give them some points is just the fact that the add-ons change the music. Like, your chase music can be entirely different depending on what you're using as add-ons, and I think just the design of that was super cool and super unique. So I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10 overall. This totals to 32 points, which puts them below Hillbilly in the C tier. All right, for Wesker, fun factor. I think Wesker is one of the most fun killers in the entire game to play and is pretty fun to play against as well. I know there's a lot of people that hate playing against Wesker, but that's purely because everybody plays Wesker because he's so fun. So you're kind of sick of playing against him, right? And the only other reason people don't enjoy playing against him is because of his hitbox issue, but that's again not really a Wesker specific issue. So overall, I'm going to give this character a 9 out of 10. I think from both sides, he is a fun killer. He's just a little bit overused right now. Visual appearance, I'm actually going to give this a low score of 3 out of 10. I do not like the visual appearance of Wesker at all. I do not think he fits into Dead by Daylight. I haven't played the Resident Evil game that he's in, so I don't have that personal connection that some of you may have. And I just think that he is so not Dead by Daylight. For ability creativity, I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. I think it's good. I think it's creative. Throwing survivors against walls is super cool, but I do think the dash is kind of just a mix of like Nurse and Demogorgon, so that's why the score is a little bit lower. For add-ons, I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. There's some add-ons that are kind of useful and kind of change his playstyle, but they're very difficult to use properly to the point where your playstyle actually feels changed. Does that make sense? So the add-ons aren't necessarily too basic, they're just not great. And lastly, for sound design, I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. I think he has good sound design, and I do like the fact that he speaks in game. It's really funny. It doesn't really fit the aesthetic of Dead by Daylight again, so that's why it's not a 9 or a 10. This totals him to 34 points, tying him with the Hillbilly. All right, moving on to Nemesis. I personally don't think Nemesis is very fun to play as or against. I think there's certain fun aspects of him, but I just, for some reason, like, the zombies are so inconsistent that they either do nothing if you're playing as Nemesis, or if you're playing a survivor, they'll just be in your face constantly, and you just can't do anything about it in chase. So I'm gonna give his fun factor a 4 out of 10. For visual appearance, I think his visual appearance is okay. I'm gonna give this a 6 out of 10. Again, I don't think it fits into DBD very well. It's just, he's not scary. He's just like big. So I'm not a huge fan of his visuals. Ability, creativity, I would say this is a 7 out of 10. I think his abilities are okay. Like, I think the zombies are a really creative concept, but I just don't think they were executed very well. However, I do think that the infection thing is kind of creative and fits his theme very well, but the tentacle is just like any other ranged attack, like Pyramid Head or Huntress. For add-ons, I'm gonna give this also a 7 out of 10. There's some that kind of change the playstyle, but it's mostly the playstyle of the zombies, which you're not in control of, so it doesn't really affect you. For that reason, I'm gonna drop it to a 6. The add-ons, like, yes, there's some unique add-ons, like the ones that make the zombies spawn outside of the exit gate when all gens are finished, but like, they don't really affect you. They affect the survivors without you really knowing. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to explain, but that's why I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. And for sound design, I'll give this a 7 out of 10. I think the sound design is pretty good, but for some reason, something feels off about it. I don't know if it's like too much bass. It just doesn't feel as professional as like Dredge or Blight. But this totals him to 40 points, which places him at the bottom of A tier. Moving on to Freddy Krueger. Freddy is pretty boring to play as and very boring to play against. So overall, I'm going to give his fun factor a 4. The only reason it has any sort of points is because playing as Freddy is somewhat fun if you're using dream palettes, and also doing various teleporting mind games is kind of fun as well, but there's not really that much that you can do with him. Visual appearance, I think visual appearance is actually fairly solid solid. I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10, mostly for the animations of his hand whenever he hits a survivor. Just like the little wiggle that he does with his fingers every time he hits a survivor is very cool. And I think all the visual appearance of like him going in and out of the dream world and his teleporting and all the fake stuff everywhere is awesome. Ability creativity, I'm gonna give this a 10 out of 10. I think he's one of the most creative killers in the game to date. The fact that there's an entire different dimension that survivors are pulled into and there's various ways to get out of that dimension is really unique and really interesting. It's just unfortunate that it's not that good and also not that fun. But I think in concept, he's a really awesome killer. For add-on, his add-ons are a little rough. I'm gonna give him a 6 out of 10. There's some that are decent and change his playstyle, like the one that makes a Freddy appear in all gens when you're teleporting doesn't allow you to cancel your teleport. However, most of them are just like little tiny things that aren't really that useful, to be honest. Like there's a purple add-on that makes survivors hemorrhaged when they interact with a dream trap. How is that helpful at all? For his sound design, I would say his sound design is very, very good. I'm gonna give this a 9 out of 10. I think the lullaby of the children in the dream world is awesome. I think the teleporting sounds and the blood sounds are awesome. The kind of metal sound of his hand is awesome. And the dream snares make a very cool kind of scream sound as well. This puts him at a 37, which places him above the cannibal. This is kind of surprising because he's one of the most underused killers in the entire game. Okay, for nurse, this is hard for fun factor because it very much depends on the player. Like if the nurse is really bad, she's going to be very fun to play against, but feel very awful to play as. However, if the nurse is good, she's going to feel very fun to play as, but very bad to play against. So I'm probably going to give her a 6 because from a killer's perspective, I think she's one of the most fun killers in the entire game. But from a survivor's perspective, if the nurse is good, she's obviously not fun to play against at all, especially if you're playing solo queue. Visual appearance, I think it's pretty decent. I really like the kind of supernatural elements of her visual appearance. I just don't think that her outfit is really anything special, but she is one of the first killers in the game, so I can't really blame them that much. Ability creativity absolutely is going to a 10. She is super, super creative, especially for the time. Being able to teleport through walls, all of the elements that kind of tie her into the lore as well, it's a very, very creative ability. And the fact that they were able to implement her as one of the first killers in the game is kind of insane to me. For her add-ons, I'm going to give these an 8 out of 10. There are a lot of add-ons that change her style entirely. It's just they're kind of not great. Like most of them are not great. It's like 2 purples and 1 iridescent. So yes, theoretically you can change your playstyle, but sometimes you're just detrimenting yourself to the point where she's not even that fun anymore. And lastly, for sound design, absolutely is going to be a 10 out of 10. She has phenomenal sound design with her screams and her teleporting sounds and her fatigue sounds. I love her sound design so much. This puts her at a total of 42 points, placing her right next to the Cenobite. All right, for Oni, I would say Oni is one of the most balanced killers in the game as well. I love his ability design. I love playing against it from a survivor's perspective. I love using it from a killer's perspective. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. The only reason that it's not a 10 is because his ability is designed to slug because it's on a limited timer. So if you're playing with survivors that aren't exactly coordinated, he's not the most fun to play against. But besides the slugging issue, in chase, he's super, super fun. And he has that risk reward of healing or not healing. For his visual appearance, I'm going to give him a 9. I think he looks awesome. The only reason it's not a 10 out of 10 is because he doesn't have a lot to work with for cosmetics. Everything kind of looks the same. Since he's so visually cluttering in a sense, all of his cosmetics look the same. But other than that, fantastic design. Ability creativity, I think this is a 10. Using the survivor's blood to power yourself up and then become enraged is so awesome. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it a lot. I think it's such a cool, unique thing that we've never seen in Dead by Daylight. For his add-ons are kind of rough. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. And there's some add-ons that are even detrimental to you and help the survivors more, like his iridescent add-on, which allows the survivors to pick up their blood orbs, meaning you can't get your power as often. Like, why would anyone ever run that? And last but not least, his sound design, of course, is a 10 out of 10. Like, there's just no argument. I don't even need to explain why. This brings him to a 43, putting him just below the Doctor. Moving on to the Onryo. Fun factor. I do not think she's fun to play as, and I really don't think she's that fun to play against. For some reason, playing as her just feels horrible, probably because she's so weak, but like, it doesn't feel like you can do anything sometimes. And playing against her also feels kind of not great because you never really know if she's manifested or demanifested. And since the condemned Sadako thing exists, that's also one of the most boring things in this entire game. So fun factor, I'm going to give her a 5 out of 10. I think they did a great job with her visual appearance. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Her hit animation is really cool. The way she looks is really cool. The staticky nature of her is also very cool. The TVs are great. Everything about that is pretty solid. Ability creativity, I would say it's decent, but not amazing. She's kind of just a mix between Wraith and Dredge. So I'm going to give her creativity a 6 out of 10. Her add-ons are fine, but they're not great. I'm going to give these a 6 out of 10 as well. They don't really do much, but they can kind of change your playstyle, like the green add-on that increases the duration of your movement speed after teleporting, which can help in a lot of situations, but it's kind of up to the survivors, honestly. And then for sound design, I would give this an 8 out of 10. I think her sound design is pretty decent. The lullaby is very cool. The TV and VHS sounds are also very cool, but I still feel like there's something missing from her sound design, and I don't know what it is. This totals her to 34 points, putting her right in the top of C tier. All right, for Pig, she's not that fun to play as and not that fun to play against, so I'm gonna give her fun factor a 6 out of 10. Her visual appearance is okay. It's kind of weird having a character that is a pig, but it does for some reason fit the Dead by Daylight aesthetic. Like, she totally fits into the game, but overall I don't think her visual appearance is that good, so I'm gonna give this a 6 out of 10 as well. Ability creativity, I would say it's pretty creative. The fact that there's head traps that survivors have to take off or their entire head pops is pretty damn cool. And I also like the fact that she can crouch to become stealthy. It's just not that good. So I'm going to give her ability creativity a 7. I do actually think she has decent add-ons that change her playstyle quite a bit. Like, some increase the number of boxes, some help her crouching speed. So you can kind of focus on different areas of her kit and amplify those, which I do really like. There's just a lot of them that aren't too amazing, which is fine. And lastly, sound design. I would say her sound design is pretty good. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I think the beeping is really good at kind of creating tension when you have an active head trap on you. Her little lion roar with her dash is cool. I just don't think there's like a lot of sound design, which is just kind of based on the simplicity of her character. This totals her at 34 points, putting her right under Wesker. Okay, for Plague, fun factor, I'm not totally a fan of playing as her or against her. I'm going to give her overall fun factor a 7 out of 10. For visual appearance, this is hands down going to be a 10. She is exactly what her name is. She has this disgusting look with like maggots crawling out of her, and half of her face is burnt, but she also still has that very unique priestess high royalty look, which we haven't had in Dead by Daylight besides her. I think she has one of the coolest visual appearances in the game. Ability creativity, I would say this is also a 10. Being able to use your puke to infect items, preventing survivors from healing unless they go to a pool of devotion to heal themselves, but then that gives you a stronger ability which can damage survivors. It's probably one of the most unique powers in the entire game. I'm gonna give her add-ons an 8 out of 10. I like that you can focus on certain aspects of her kit to make her stronger. Like, you can either have Corrupt Purge be better, or you can have her regular infections be better. Even her brown add-ons are good. And her add-ons aren't overbearing either. Like, Black Incense is probably her strongest add-on because it shows the auras of anybody that's sick, basically. But it still isn't like super overpowered. It's just like very strong. And for sound design, I'm gonna give this a 10 out of 10. I think she has fantastic sound design, from the whispers when she's in her power, to the puking, to even the little detail of swallowing her puke back down when you cancel her power. There's so many cool elements of her sound design that fit her character perfectly, and overall this totals her at 45 points, putting her in the S tier. Next up is Michael Myers. Fun factor, I do not think he is that fun to play as, and he's decent to play against. Base kit, I don't think he's that fun to play as or against. However, there's so many different add-ons that completely change his playstyle that it adds a lot of variety to this character. So I'm gonna give his total fun factor a 7 out of 10. Visual appearance, I think it's great. Like, obviously it's simple, but it fits the character perfectly, so I'll give this a 9 out of 10. Ability creativity, I would say it was good for its time, but it's very outdated now. It does fit the stalking element of this character, and being able to stalk survivors to become stronger is a cool and unique ability, but it's just so outdated nowadays that I just can't give it a good score. So I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. For add-ons, I'm gonna give this a 9 out of 10. So many of the add-ons completely change his playstyle, which I really like because it adds a lot of variety for playing as and against him. However, there's some that are just completely broken, like the Tombstone add-on. So that's why I didn't give it a 10 out of 10. And for sound design, I'll give this a 7 out of 10. Obviously, there's not a lot that they can do because he's such a simple character. It's not necessarily any bad sound design or any good sound design, you know? So I'm just giving it kind of the mid-tier grade. This totals him at 39 points, putting him right below the Pyramid Head. Moving on to Spirit. I think Spirit is actually not fun to play as and not fun to play against. So I'm gonna give her fun factor a 5. Her visual appearance is incredible. I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. The glass shards that are kind of cut into her, and the floating body parts, and kind of the twitchy, glitchy nature of her character are so cool. I love her visual appearance. Her ability creativity is going to be a 10, hands down. One of the most creative abilities in the game. Going into a completely different dimension where you're faster but you can't see survivors is such a unique concept. And the fact that you have the passive where you glitch in and out of existence, also very cool. So hands down, 10 out of 10. I like her add-ons too, but some of them are borderline overpowered, like her mother-daughter ring. So I'll give her add-ons an 8 out of 10. I do like that they focus focus on different parts of her power. Like you can either get your power back quicker, or you can move faster in her power. Or there's other add-ons that are relatively new, like blocking windows when you have a husk near your power. I just think that her add-ons are a bit overtuned, especially Mother-Daughter Ring and the amulet. And for sound design, I'll give this one a 9 out of 10. I really like her sound design, from her phasing to even the sounds that she makes when she swings or when she gets stunned. I think it all fits her character very well. This totals her to 41 points, putting her right below the Dredge. All right, for the Skull Merchant, I find the Skull Merchant to be one of the most boring characters in the game from both sides. However, I don't think she's as boring as the Knight. So I'm going to give her a 3 out of 10 on the fun factor. Part of the reason she has a few points is because I like the stealth abilities of her kit. And I also like the fact that as Survivor, whenever you're disabling a drone, there's actual like different skill checks that we've never had in DBD before, which gives me hope for the creativity of future killers. Visual appearance, this is going to be a 3 out of 10. I do not like her visual appearance at all. I think there was so much wasted potential. I like the drones. I think the drones are the only cool things, but the killer itself is so poorly designed in my opinion. For ability creativity, I would say it's actually not bad. I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. I think her ability is very unique to Dead by Daylight. The fact that you have a tracker to track survivors and the fact that you can put drones up around the map that can be disabled is really unique. I don't think it fits Dead by Daylight, but I think it's very unique. Her add-ons aren't terrible, but they're not great either. I'm going to give them a 6 out of 10. Some of them can kind of change the playstyle with the drones, but like really they don't do much. And lastly, for sound design, I actually don't think her sound design is terrible, but for some reason it just doesn't sound as satisfying as other killers on this list. So I'm going to give her overall sound design a 7. This totals her to 27 points, putting her at the bottom of the D tier. All right, Trapper. Fun factor is going to be a 4. I hate playing as the Trapper and I hate playing against the Trapper. And he's not even good. He's not even a good killer and I still hate playing against him. I hate playing against him because I don't like the paranoia that he causes while you're in chase and the fact that he can camp areas so easily, and that's one of the most effective ways to play this killer. So overall, not a fun killer. And if you're playing as the killer, he's so weak that sometimes you have to resort to camping because there's nothing else that you can do. It's just, he's not fun at all. Visual appearance, I would say, is a 5 as well. I don't like the look of him that much. He's very, very basic. I like the little metal things sticking out of his shoulders, and obviously his mask is iconic because he's the first character in this game, but he's just way too simple. Ability creativity, I would say, is actually pretty creative. Obviously, he's one of the first characters in the game, but being able to set up bear traps around the map to catch survivors is a very unique concept. I'm going to give his creativity a 7 out of 10. His add-ons are actually pretty nice as well. There's a lot of add-ons that do a lot of different things that don't necessarily change his play style, but they are very helpful. So I'm going to give his add-ons an overall score of 8 out of 10. And lastly, his sound design, I just think his sound design is very basic. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. There's not much you can do because, again, he's a basic character, but this gives him a score of 30, which puts him at the top of D tier. Moving on to the Trickster, I think Trickster is one of the most boring characters to play as and play against. When I'm playing as him, I just feel bad for the survivors because there's nothing they can do in chase. And of course, when I'm playing as the survivor, it just feels like there's nothing I can do in chase. So he's so boring. I'm going to give his fun factor a 3 out of 10. For visual appearance, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10. I don't think it's like horrible, but I don't really think it fits Dead by Daylight. And I think they could have done a lot more with his design as like a deranged music artist. Ability creativity, this is going to be a 3. It's just Huntress, but you throw faster and do less damage. All of his add-ons are pretty mid as well, so I'm going to give it a 6. I do think that the iridescents are a little bit more unique and kind of changes playstyle and kind of changes how you interact with survivors, but I'd say those are really the only two. Oh wait, no. Trick blades are cool. Being able to bounce blades off of walls, I think that's one of the most unique add-ons we have in this game. For sound design, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. I think they actually nailed the sound design of this killer, even down to the breathing. Like when he's running, he breathes faster than when he's not running. The sounds of his knives are decent. The hit sound with the knives are kind of weird, which is why I'm not giving him a 10 out of 10. All of the sounds that he makes and the things that he'll comment throughout the match are really funny, so that's why it's a 9. However, this totals him to 26 points, putting him below the Skull Merchant, which is kind of surprising. All right, we only have 2 more killers on this list. Make sure you drop a like if you're enjoying this video, and comment a burger emoji down below if you got this far. For the twins, I'm going to put a fun factor of 3. I don't think she's fun to play as, and I don't think she's fun to play against. Playing as her just feels so clunky with all of the cooldowns and all of the bugs, and playing against her just feels horrible because she promotes such a bad playstyle of camping and slugging and tunneling. Plus, if you're in chase with Victor, it kind of just feels like there's nothing you can do to counter him. For visual appearance, I'd give this a 6 out of 10. I think Victor in the chest is cool, but I think everything else is just kind of meh. For ability creativity, I'll give this a 7 out of 10, purely because having 2 killers in one is something that's never been done before, and being able to be in 2 places at once is a very unique concept. However, Victor just has a pounce, kind of like Demogorgon, and Charlotte doesn't really have anything. For add-ons, I think their add-ons are pretty god-awful as well. I would say this is a 5. Like, supposedly all of the 3 Twins players on this planet just use the brown toy sword add-on. So, like, what's the point in any of their other add-ons? For sound design, I'll give this a 7 out of 10. I don't think it's terrible, but I don't think it's great. Victor sounds exactly what he looks like, and the sounds of her changing between the 2 characters is very nice, hence why it's a 7. But everything else is just kind of meh. This totals her to 28 points, putting her below the clown. And last but not least, we have the Wraith. Fun factor, I'm gonna give the Wraith a 9 out of 10. I think he's one of the most fun killers in the game. He's so fast-paced. There's so many different playstyles that you can do with him. Very, very awesome and fun killer. And there's counterplay on both sides. Playing against him as Survivor is fun. Playing as him as Killer is fun. Overall, solid balanced character. Visual appearance, I mean, you can't see him half the time, so there's that. But I'd say visual appearance is like, I'd say a 7. Having your weapon be a spine is really cool, but his overall appearance is just kind of basic. Ability creativity, I would say for the time, is a very creative concept. Becoming invisible and being able to get a speed boost after you uncloak is a really unique concept, although I do think it's quite outdated, so I'm gonna give that an 8 out of 10. For add-ons, this is hands down a 10 out of 10. Every single one of his add-ons is helpful in a certain way and is a very different playstyle. I think Wraith is exactly how add-ons should be designed, where it changes how you play the killer and it focuses on different abilities. And then sound design, I would say sound design is pretty good, from the breathing to the bell sounds to the uncloaking sounds. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. This totals him to 42 points, putting him just below the Huntress. Let me know if you agree or disagree with this list down in the comments below. If you want to see another video you might like, check out this video on screen now.